Have you ever wondered what happens when the kindest person you know suddenly stops trying? Not because they've stopped loving, but because something deeper has shifted, something that makes everyone around them nervous. Imagine the moment when someone who has spent their entire life absorbing everyone else's pain finally looks in the mirror and says, "I'm done." What you're witnessing isn't weakness. It's the birth of the most dangerous kind of person you'll ever encounter. Carl Jung called it the return of the repressed, when everything you've buried deep inside to survive finally rises to protect you. And when an empath reaches that point, they don't explode in anger. They don't collapse dramatically or make grand declarations. They simply disappear. Not physically, but energetically. They become unavailable in ways that shake the very foundation of every relationship they've ever had. You've spent your whole life being told you're too sensitive, too emotional, too much. But what if the real problem was never your sensitivity? What if the problem was a world that mistakes your depth for weakness, your empathy for unlimited availability, and your emotional intelligence for emotional servitude? What if everything you've been taught about being too much was actually society's way of keeping you small, manageable, and endlessly useful to others? Empaths are profoundly misunderstood, not because they're mysterious or mystical, but because their true strength remains invisible until the moment it finally breaks free from the constraints they place on themselves. From the outside, you appear calm, soft, always available when someone needs support. You become the person others call at 2 a.m. when their world is falling apart. But here's the question that will haunt you. Who calls you when your world does? You listen to problems that aren't yours to solve, carrying the weight of other people's choices as if they're your responsibility. You become a container for everyone else's unexpressed grief, unprocessed anger, and unacknowledged fear. You hold space for emotions that others refuse to feel, while your own emotional needs go unnoticed, unattended, and unloved. Think about this carefully. You forgive betrayals that would shatter most people's trust forever. You make excuses for behavior you would never accept from yourself. You give chance after chance to people who've already shown you exactly who they are. You've transformed yourself into a sanctuary for everyone else's pain while your own remains invisible to the very people you're helping. Carl Jung described this as profound split in the psyche, the unbearable tension between the persona you show the world and the shadow parts you exile to gain acceptance. For empaths, that persona is the eternal helper, the one who's always okay, always understanding, always giving from what appears to be an endless well of compassion. You perfected the art of being fine while falling apart inside. You smile through emotional starvation, staying present during conversations that drain your life force while pretending that hearing the same problems for the 100th time doesn't exhaust your soul. You become an expert at emotional labor, but nobody taught you that being needed isn't the same as being loved, and being useful isn't the same as being valued. But beneath that carefully constructed mask of endless availability lies someone who's never felt fully held. Someone who carries emotions others discard like they are personally responsible for healing everyone around them. Someone who's convinced themselves that their worth is measured by their willingness to suffer for others. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the conditioning and people-pleasing, you know this isn't love. It's something else entirely. When was the last time someone asked how you were doing and actually waited for a real answer? When was the last time someone held space for your pain the way you hold space for theirs? The truth is devastating. You've been holding the emotional weight of your relationships for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to be carried instead of carrying. You've been so busy being everyone's safe harbor that you've forgotten you also deserve shelter from the storm. You've been giving from an empty cup for so long that you can't remember what it felt like when it was full. You've been loving others more than you love yourself for so long that self-love feels foreign, selfish, wrong. Eventually, something inside begins to collapse. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but quietly, invisibly, completely. Your psyche starts refusing to fragment any longer. This isn't weakness. It's the beginning of the most profound transformation you'll ever experience. It's a dangerous awakening to your own worth, and it will change everything about how you move through the world. The shift doesn't announce itself with dramatic revelations. Instead, it begins in whispers, in small changes that others dismiss as temporary stress or moodiness. You stop replying to texts immediately. Messages that once sent you into spirals of anxiety now sit unread for hours, sometimes days. You let calls go to voicemail without that familiar pang of guilt. Your body is present, but your soul has quietly stepped back, creating space between who you are and who you've been performing to be. This is what Jung called the tension of opposites, the unbearable psychological pressure holding light and shadow, love and resentment, hope and disappointment until something inside simply cannot hold the contradiction anymore. Maybe you've felt this tension. The way your body says yes while your soul screams no. The way you smile while something inside you dies a little more each day. What's happening isn't a breakdown. It's a breakthrough. It's your nervous system finally saying what your voice never could. I've had enough. Asterisk, if you've ever felt this tension, if you recognize yourself in these words, hit subscribe. Because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about empathy, boundaries, and the dangerous power of a person who finally chooses themselves to asterisk. Let me tell you about Sarah. She was 32, a social worker by profession, and an emotional caretaker by compulsion. She was a friend everyone called during their 3 a.m. breakdowns, the daughter who mediated every family conflict, the colleague who stayed late to help others while her own project suffered in silence. For 3 decades, Sarah held a tension between who she was and who she thought she needed to be to deserve love. Sarah believed with her whole heart that people could change if she just loved them enough, supported them enough, understood them enough. She wore her emotional availability like a badge of honor, convinced that her silence about her own needs was noble, generous, even spiritual. But silence is a cost that compounds over time. Her nervous system began speaking a language her mind refused to acknowledge. Chronic headaches that no medication could touch. Insomnia that left her staring at the ceiling. Her body exhausted but her mind racing with everyone else's problems. A heaviness in her chest that felt like drowning in slow motion, gasping for emotional air in relationships where she was always giving mouth-to-mouth resuscitation but never receiving it. The breaking point didn't come during a dramatic fight or obvious betrayal. It came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when her sister called, upset about the same relationship pattern they'd discussed hundreds of times before. The same toxic dynamic, the same excuses, the same request of Sarah to absorb the emotional chaos and transform it into wisdom. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt nothing. Not anger. She'd moved past anger years ago. Not frustration. Frustration required a belief that things could change. Not even compassion. That well had finally run dry. Just a profound, crystalline clarity that seemed to come from the deepest part of her being. I'm done. This is a moment when caring stops feeling like love and starts feeling like self-abandonment. When empathy stops feeling like a gift and starts feeling like a prison you've locked yourself inside. This moment marks the beginning of what Jung called the emergence of the shadow, not the evil parts of yourself, but the parts you've been taught to reject in order to be loved. The parts that can say no without guilt. The parts that can choose self-protection over self-sacrifice. The parts that refuse to set themselves on fire to keep others warm. Sarah's wall didn't build itself overnight. It rose slowly, brick by brick, constructed from every time she was overlooked in conversation she was actively facilitating. Every time her gentleness was mistaken for weakness. Every time her availability was assumed rather than appreciated. That wall doesn't scream or blame or demand apologies. It doesn't need vindication or validation. It simply stands, solid and unshakable, between the person you were and the person you're becoming. And you stand behind it, not afraid anymore, not guilty anymore, but finally unavailable to be used. This isn't cruelty. This isn't emotional shutdown. This is your nervous system finally saying what your voice never could. I won't fragment any longer. I won't abandon myself for anyone else's comfort. I won't disappear just to make others feel whole. Jung understood that the psyche has a natural drive toward wholeness, toward integration. When we split ourselves, hiding our needs to maintain relationships, suppressing our authentic responses to keep the peace, something inside begins pushing toward healing, toward reclaiming what we abandoned to be accepted. The collapse isn't your weakness revealing itself. It's your strength finally refusing to hide anymore. It's your soul declaring independence from the exhausting performance of being perpetually available for everyone else's emotional needs. This is when you become dangerous. Not because you hurt others, but because you can no longer be hurt in the same ways that once controlled you. Friends, family members, romantic partners watching confusion as you stop performing emotional labor like it's your life's purpose. They call you distant, different, changed. They say you're not yourself anymore, which is ironic because you're actually becoming more yourself than you've ever been. They want the old you back, The one who absorbed their chaos and called it care, who translated their dysfunction into compassion, who made their emotional immaturity feel like someone else's responsibility. But what's happening isn't coldness. It's shadow integration, the reclaiming of all the self-protection and healthy boundaries you've been taught to reject as selfish. Sarah's integration began the day she stopped explaining herself. Her sister called again, expecting the usual emotional support session. But instead of the familiar, "Tell me everything, I'm here for you," Sarah said something that changed everything. "I'm not available for this conversation right now." No justification, no elaborate explanation, no apology for having boundaries. Just a simple, clear statement of her current reality. Her sister was shocked into silence. Then came the predictable response. "You're being selfish. I need to talk to someone. What's wrong with you?" For the first time in 32 years, Sarah replied, "Yes, I'm being selfish, and there's nothing wrong with me." That yes is the most dangerous word an empath can learn to say. Because once you stop being driven by the desperate fear of losing someone, you become moved by something deeper and infinitely more powerful, the absolute refusal to lose yourself anymore. You stop explaining your boundaries to people who never respected them. You stop proving your worth to those who took it for granted. You stop performing the role of the understanding one, the available one, the one who exists to make others comfortable with their own emotional immaturity. This is individuation, the process of becoming whole by embracing the part of yourself you once rejected. The parts that can say no without drowning in guilt. The parts that can choose silence over explaining yourself to people determined to misunderstand you. The parts that can walk away from love that requires you to disappear. How many relationships in your life would survive if you stopped being the one who always gave more, cared more, tried more? Once this integration begins, you become dangerous not because you hurt others, but because you can no longer be hurt in the same ways that once controlled you. You've walked through the fire of your own emotional abandonment and discovered something incredible. You didn't burn. Instead, you were reforged into something stronger, clearer, more authentically yourself than you ever thought possible. The integrated empath doesn't fight. They simply become unavailable to be used, manipulated, or exploited. Others notice a change immediately, and their reactions tell you everything you need to know about the true nature of your previous relationships. Some people panic. They escalate their demands for your attention, your emotional labor, your availability. They guilt you, manipulate you, remind you of all the times they needed you. They cannot fathom a version of you that prioritizes your own well-being. Others simply disappear. Without your willingness to be their emotional dumping ground, they discover they have no genuine interest in you as a person. The relationship was never mutual. It was extractive. They were never loving you. They were using you. But a precious few, those who truly love you rather than just needing you, celebrate your transformation. They've been waiting for you to value yourself the way they value you. They notice the way you no longer rush to fill uncomfortable silences, the way you let their emotions belong to them instead of absorbing them as your own, the way you choose your own peace over their temporary comfort. To those who are using you, your transformation feels like loss. To you, it feels like coming home to yourself after a lifetime of living in exile. You discover that real love doesn't require you to be less than you are. Healthy relationships don't drain you of your life force. Your sensitivity isn't a character flaw to be managed. It's a superpower to be honored and protected. The dangerous empath loves more purely because they love from choice rather than compulsion. They give more meaningfully because they give from overflow rather than emptiness. They connect more deeply because they are no longer trying to disappear into others to avoid the discomfort of being themselves. You've learned the difference between being loving and being available, between being kind and being exploitable, between being empathetic and being a dumping ground for others' unprocessed emotions. In a world that preys on softness, that mistakes gentleness for weakness and kindness for unlimited availability, the person who reclaims their softness with wisdom becomes untouchable. Not because they are hard or closed off, but because they are whole. You become the light that no longer need permission to shine. You radiate not because someone gives you validation, but because that's your nature when you're not dimming yourself for others' comfort. Consider Sarah's relationship with a new partner. "You're so independent," he said early in their relationship, and she could hear the slight complaint in his voice, the unconscious expectation that love meant having unlimited access to her emotional labor. "Yes," she replied simply. He had to decide whether he wanted to love her or control her, whether he was interested in partnership or possession. Fortunately, he chose love. This is the individuated self, a soul no longer split between pleasing others and honoring themselves. You transformed your pain into discernment, your silence into a sanctuary, every wound into a boundary that protects rather than punishes. You're no longer baited into arguments that go nowhere. You're no longer seduced by potential that exists only in your imagination. You're no longer moved by apologies offered without behavioral changes to back them up. The dangerous empath is dangerous because they reclaimed their softness and paired it with an unshakable sense of self-worth. They've learned that the most loving thing they can do is remain whole while loving others. They are not the one who gives themselves away piece by piece until they disappear. They are the one who learn that their presence is a gift, not their absence from their own life. What would change in your life today if you truly believed that you are worthy of the same love, care, and consideration that you give so freely to others? The world desperately needs empaths, but it needs empaths who know their worth, who can feel deeply without losing themselves in the feeling, who can love fully without abandoning their own hearts in the process. Your journey through shadow integration isn't just personal healing. It's a radical act of love for a world that's forgotten what healthy relationships look like. You become the living example that it's possible to be soft and strong simultaneously, loving and boundaried, generous and self-protective. In becoming dangerous to those who would use you, you become safe for those who would truly love you. You become a beacon for other empaths still drowning in their own compassion, still believing that love means self-sacrifice, still confusing their worth with their willingness to suffer for others. Your transformation gives them permission to value themselves. Your boundaries show them what self-respect looks like. Your refusal to abandon yourself teaches them that they don't have to abandon themselves either. In a world hungry for authentic connection, for relationships built on mutual respect rather than exploitation, your particular brand of dangerous safety is exactly what we need. You're not too much. You never were. You're not too sensitive, too emotional, too caring. You are perfectly calibrated for a world that desperately needs a medicine of conscious empathy, empathy given from choice, not compulsion. The dangerous empath is not the one who stops feeling. They are the one who feels everything and chooses their responses consciously. They are the one who love from fullness rather than need. They are the one who has learned that the greatest act of service is becoming who they truly are. Your journey to wholeness matters not just for you, but for everyone who will benefit from your authentic, boundaried, consciously loving presence in this world. You become proof that transformation is possible, that empath can reclaim their power without losing their hearts, that sensitivity paired with self-respect is the most revolutionary force on earth. Your story of transformation could be the key that unlocks someone else's prison of people-pleasing. Share your journey in the comments below. When did you first realize you were giving too much of yourself away? What was your breaking point? Your courage to change could be exactly what another empath needs to hear today.